order of this worksheet, you do have to pay attention as we go. This first section is just mostly informational, and the second section, or the back half of the paper, is all about how to use different construction methods to actually make your project. So this first part, before clay is fired, so when I say fired, I mean put in a big thing called a kiln and baked. Before it's fired, it's called greenware. So greenware is spelled like the color green, W-A-R-E, greenware. And that's just a fancy way of saying this is clay that's never been fired. So this clay, and this hefty 25-pound brick, this is greenware. This is the type of clay you're going to be using for your project. Now, greenware can dry. So, for example, this type of clay when it's dry looks like this. It's a lot lighter in color, but this is still greenware. If I put this in some water, it would dissolve, turn into mud, and then I could let the water evaporate and it would turn back into clay. It could be a repeated cycle. So this is still greenware. Now, once we put it in the kiln, which we fire to about 1900 degrees, it changes. The chemical composition of the molecules actually change. So this turns into this. This is called bisqueware. So it's a super weird word. B-I-S-Q-U-E. Bisqueware. B-I-S-Q-U-E-W-A-R-E. So when we bisque fire clay, it has that like metallic clay sound, whereas greenware doesn't. This kind of just sounds like dried dirt. That's what it is. And this kind of sounds like glass. For our projects, we're going to be stopping at this part. So we'll paint our sculptures because we don't have time to do the next step, which is called glazeware. So if you take pottery, you'll be able to glaze your work, so you could make a bowl or a cup or a mug, and you could actually drink out of it, or a vase, right?
You could.
Bisqueware is porous. So if I made a cup out of bisqueware and poured a bunch of liquid in it, it would kind of soak it up. Glaze creates a coat over top of it, so it's not porous anymore. And that's where it gets this sort of shiny coat. So the last step is called glazeware. You will not do this unless you take pottery, and then you'll have a chance to do glaze. Any questions on those first three? Honestly, the only one you need to worry about is the first one, because the first one is the one you can control. It's kind of my job to do the second step, which is firing it. So that's the step that I'm in control of. You're only in control of your clay while you're building it. So, this clay, this is called stoneware. So there's lots of different types of clay. This stuff is made in Minnesota, so I don't know if that makes it more special or not. Clay County is named for the clay in the soil, but this stuff is manufactured at a company and they mix it like cement. So they mix all the powdered elements, add water, and then they sell it in 25-pound bricks. And that's how we buy it. When you get your clay today, you are going to be getting a 5-pound piece of clay. So approximately this much. Okay?
Each and every single one of them.
5 pounds.
I'm sweating.
Here's the deal. You can make it through without tying. You can. Please don't be super distracting to your neighbors. If you have something to say, keep it in for a little bit and just wait till the end of class or till the end of my demo, and then you can talk to your friends. So, greenware, some people call the first stage of greenware slip. So slip is basically just clay mixed with water. It's mud, really. And we really only use it for one thing. What we use slip for is to attach two pieces of clay together. That's its purpose. It's like clay glue. But really, it's not sticky, it's just clay and water mixed together. Now if I were to leave this out overnight and some of the water evaporated off of it, it would turn into the next step, which is called plastic. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but plastic clay is like the clay you're used to. It's the stuff that's easy to mold. You can use it to shape anything you need to shape. This is the stage you want your clay to be in while you're working with it. Does that make sense? Last one.
That did make sense.
Can you guys make a little aisle so that way the people walking in and out of our demo all day?
He just walked right
If I were to let this dry a little bit more, so let's say I sculpted something and most of it was constructed, but I just had some details to add, some carvings. Maybe I had to attach a few pieces together. If I leave this out a little bit longer, it becomes leather hard. So leather hard clay is clay that still has a little bit of moisture in it. You can't really bend it or it will break, but you can still carve into it, you can still attach pieces to it. It's not completely dry. So this plastic clay that's easy to mold would turn into leather hard clay, which is a little more breakable, but you can carve and attach things. The very last stage, which you will not let your clay get to until you are done, this is called bone dry. So bone dry clay has no moisture left in it whatsoever, and it's also super fragile. So this is really easy to like break and crumble. So if your sculpture is in this form, if it's completely dry, all the tiny details will be really fragile. You cannot mess with it anymore. You can't attach anything anymore. Let's say you made this awesome sculpture and it was amazing, super beautiful, and you let it dry, and then you needed to add one more thing. You would not be able to. If your sculpture was the best thing ever and you forgot to hollow it out or forgot to add a piece to it, once it's dry, it's done. The only way that you could turn this back into clay you could use is by dunking it in a tub of water, letting it dissolve, letting the water evaporate off of it into slip, letting this evaporate into this, and then you'd restart your sculpture. So you can see that it's kind of a cycle, and once it's dry, you're done. Any questions on those kind of steps or stages of clay? Any questions on those?
No.
Okay. So, we fire our clay in a kiln. That's spelled K-I-L-N. Some people pronounce it a kill. Like one of my professors in college pronounced it kill. It has an N on the end, so I pronounce kiln. It's basically a big oven. It's round and the door opens at the top. And you fill it with the clay projects, fire it to 1900 degrees, and when they come out, they're this color, and they look like this. It is your responsibility to make sure your clay is the right consistency the whole time. So if you aren't paying attention or you don't cover up your clay and it dries before you're ready, that's something you need to figure out how to deal with, because your clay is your responsibility. Any questions on that? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some techniques, and I kind of need you to pay attention to which one of these are going to work for you and which are not, because not all of you are going to use the same techniques. This is one that you all will use, and you'll all have to do this right away. This first one is called wedging. And wedging clay is kind of like kneading dough. So if you've ever made bread, you probably are at an advantage because you've kneaded dough before, and you're able to kind of do this motion with your hands.
What'd you just do?
So when you're wedging clay, the process is not simple. I think it's kind of like a muscle workout a little bit, but I do not have a lot of upper body strength. So if you have a lot of upper body strength, you're probably good. If you don't, you might have to break your clay up into smaller pieces and do these piece by piece. That's totally fine. Basically, you're gonna start with a piece of clay. This would be what I would consider the max for me. And you're gonna try to get it into some sort of spherical shape to start with. So for the most part, I use the heel of my hand, or I can use the table to help get this clay into some sort of spherical shape so it's not an oblong rectangle. When I start wedging, I'm going to put the heels of my hands together, and I'm going to press with the heels of my hands down and away at a diagonal. So I'm pressing down and away from here, and I'm squishing my clay into the table a little bit. Squishing my clay into the table. Now my goal isn't to squish my clay so much that it like smears onto the table in a sad, flat piece. It's just to squish it a little bit and repeat that process a time. So here's what it looks like. It's kind of hard to see. I do have a video on haiku if you can't see this. This clay is a little bit hard, so this is going to be more difficult today than it will be tomorrow. So, heels of my hands together, kind of like a butterfly, pressing down and away, and I repeat that over and over. So I press down and away, I turn the clay back up to the top, move my hands to the top, press down and away, and as I'm pressing, what's happening is the clay is sort of rotating from the center to the outside. You'll notice it starts to create kind of this weird spiral. The reason we do this, actually there are two main reasons. It helps get rid of air bubbles, and air bubbles can make your project explode. And it helps keep your clay more consistent. So if one part was kind of dry and one part was a little bit wet, it would help mix it together so that way your clay would be more consistent. Okay, so that's wedging. You have to repeat this process like 30 times. It gets a little bit exhausting and honestly is kind of like a workout. And it takes a little bit of practice to get used to it. It's kind of a weird motion. Press down and away, roll to the top, down and away, roll to the top, over and over and over, until you've done this about 30 times. Okay, one way you can check to see if there are any air bubbles left is you can cut your clay in half and look. So, let's say I did this 30 times. I wanted to check.
Yeah.
So, for the most part, I don't see any air bubbles. You'd be able to see kind of air pockets. This looks pretty okay. What happens if there's like a little bit of a dent and I just put these two pieces back together?
It don't go back together.
What's in there? This would just be a giant air bubble in here. So anytime you attach two pieces of clay preliminary, like this stuff isn't finished product, I like to make these sort of rounded, so when I hit them together, there's no air trapped between them. It's only clay, and then I can keep wedging this just like I was. Okay, any questions on wedging? You have to do this when you get your clay. The nice thing is the clay is fresh, so you may only need to do it 10 times because it came directly out of the box. It should not have tons of air bubbles. If you build a sculpture, hate it, crumple up your clay, you would have to wedge it again. And that time there probably are a lot of air bubbles.
Bone dry.
Okay, the next thing we're going to learn about is slabs. So some of you will use this, some of you will not. A slab is just a flat sheet of clay. So if you've ever made pie crust, it's basically like rolling out some pie dough. You take your clay, and first you're going to have to sort of press it into a pancake. So if you just take a lump of clay like this and try to roll it out, you're going to break my roller, and you're going to be frustrated. So before you start that, you're going to take your clay and just sort of press it on the table until your clay is somewhat flat. When you roll out your clay, you're gonna have to lift your clay up every once in a while to make sure it's not sticking to the table. These tables, just these two, are covered in canvas. They're called wedging tables specifically because they're for wedging, but they're designed to help clay not stick to them. If I did this on one of these tables, there's a pretty solid chance the clay would stick and I'd have to scrape it off, and that would sort of ruin the overall point of making a slab, because it would mess it up. So your slabs should be about the thickness of your thumb. They shouldn't be super thin like paper. They shouldn't be super thick like your arm. They should be about the thickness of your thumb. Well, really any of your fingers would be fine. So once I feel like I have a consistent slab, that all of the edges are the same size, nothing's too thin, nothing's too thick. This one looks pretty close, like if I measure my thumb against the edge, it's not crazy thin, not super thick. This edge is a little bit thicker. With slabs, these work really great when they're leather hard, and they work really well to build geometric things. So if you're making a pyramid, like a pyramid shape, this works really well to cut the edges of the pyramid, attach them together. Or if you're building a house or a box or a milk carton, you can cut out all the edges, put them together to create a really geometric box. So for example, I can take this little clay knife and I can cut sort of a triangle out of here. So here's this slab. It's pretty close. Maybe it's a little bit thick, but it'll be okay. And I'll cut another one. And now I could use these two pieces to attach them together, and they could be the base of some sort of construction, whether, I don't know, depending on whatever you're making. This is a great option for building things, so you don't have to hollow them out later. So I'll talk about that next, following that. If you have worked with clay before, what would I have to do in order to make these two stick together?
Mark it.
Yeah, you need a fork and put slip. So scoring is where you literally just scratch the surface of your clay. You're going to scratch anywhere that's attaching to another piece. And slip is this stuff we talked about earlier. It's just mud, and that fills in these little grooves. So slipping and scoring is your way of making sure your clay does not fall apart and that the pieces actually stay together even throughout firing them. So I scored the edge that's attaching. I'm taking some slip and kind of filling in the space. I have to do the same thing to the other piece that I'm attaching. Taking some slip and filling in those grooves. When you attach the two pieces, you know you have enough slip if it kind of oozes out the edge. Kind of gross, but if the slip is sort of oozing out of that connection point, then you know that your two pieces will most likely stay together. They will not fall apart when they're fired or while they're dry. You have to do this anytime you attach two pieces of clay. Anytime you attach two pieces, you have to slip and score. The only exception is if you were going to take two pieces and wedge them together into one piece. Again, that's the only exception. So any questions on slabs or slipping and scoring? That's a nice little slab. Would I have to wedge this if I decided to crumple this up and reuse it? Yes, I would have to wedge this because there's probably air bubbles that got trapped in there when I crumpled all of this together. I'd have to wedge it. Once I wedged it, it would be a solid piece that I could use again and just keep building. Okay, the next method is called subtraction. So this is kind of weird, but it's pretty intuitive. For the subtractive method, you literally build what you want to build and then hollow out the middle, like you'd hollow out a cantaloupe or a watermelon or a pumpkin, right? You just leave the outer shell and scoop out the middle. Let's say I wanted to make like a, they're so challenging. I think I'm gonna make like an owl. Okay, so let's say I want to make an owl. Now this is abstract, so I'm gonna make it simple because that's how I'm gonna make it abstract. And I'm gonna start by sort of making the overall shape. So this owl is gonna be mostly an oval. I'll add the details in a little bit. So this is gonna be my owl shape. I think its eyes will kind of go like right here. Its beak can kind of go right here. Okay, so this is like the base of my owl. There's its eyes and its beak, right? Pretty gross. Now, there's a lot that I still have to do to this owl. But before I add details like wings or feathers or details in his eyes, I'm gonna hollow this out. So I'm building the basic shape, whether you're making a car or a cat or an owl or a house. You do the basic shape first, and then you cut it in half. So you're gonna use these things that you're all super impressed with already, called a wire cutter. And you're gonna cut this piece of clay in half. When I cut this in half, my goal is that I cut it in half in a way that I can actually put it back together. So if I'm not paying attention, I can cut this in a way where it's going to be very challenging to put back together. So take your time and try to actually cut this in half. What was inside this?
Air bubble.
Yeah, there's an air bubble in here. So I didn't wedge this half well enough. And this air bubble could have caused some problems later on. This is easy to fix if you wedge your clay all the way. So I'm going to take these two pieces, and I'm going to grab a tool that looks like this. These tools are hollow, and they are for hollowing things. That's their purpose. Basically, they're designed to scoop out pieces of clay, so that way your clay is not completely solid. The reason your clay cannot be solid is because it will explode if it's solid. There's just like an 80% chance that it'll just blow up in the kiln. The reason is because moisture and air bubbles get trapped in thicker clay, and air expands faster than clay molecules. So trapped air gets hot and starts to expand, and it has nowhere to go, and so it just breaks. Now it's not going to explode in the sense that it's going to like blow up the building, but it explodes enough that it will ruin your project and possibly the project's art. Okay, so you do have to hollow things out. If you make an awesome sculpture and you forget to hollow it out and it's completely solid, I will not fire it. I will not fire it because I'm not going to put other people's projects in danger because you forgot a step. So how do you know if it's done? The goal is again to use one of your fingers to sort of measure, are the edges and walls of this about the thickness of one of my fingers? If they're thicker, carve a little more. If they're thinner, they're going to be really weak. So don't carve too much. Don't accidentally like poke through the piece you're carving, because that's going to cause problems in the long run. Okay, I'm going to carve out the front half of this as well. Do you notice how I'm leaving a little bit of an edge? Do you notice how I'm leaving sort of a ledge? Why would I do that? What would be the purpose of leaving sort of an edge? Yeah, so I have a place to score when I like attach these back together. I can't just attach them back together and hope they stay. When I take these two halves and put them back together, I have to slip and score them or they're going to break apart and you're going to have a sculpture that's two pieces. So I would take my fork, scratch along the edge. You guys will take more care than I am taking because you have 5 days and I have 20 minutes. Okay. Okay, I would take enough slip that I would fill in all of those little scratch marks that I made. And that slip should sort of ooze out the edge when I attach these pieces together. Okay, we'll pretend I did a really good job slipping and scoring that. Putting these together, the slip oozes out the edge. I make sure it's connected at the right spot. I can kind of use my thumb or my hand to smooth together that seam so you can't see it anymore. I have to be kind of gentle because right now there's empty space on the inside of this, so it's easy to dent or accidentally kind of poke. Okay, so here's my owl. There's no part of this that's thicker than my finger because I hollowed it out. Does anyone see a problem other than the fact that it's ugly? Yeah, this is literally just a giant air bubble now, right? I just scooped out all the middle, sealed the entire edge, and now it's completely full of air. If you do this method, you have to create a space for the air to escape, or your clay will blow up. Generally, the easiest option is to take a clay tool and poke a hole in your clay somewhere that's not noticeable. For example, let's say you're making this cute little owl. You're not just going to be like, great, there's a hole for the air to escape. It's perfect. It's not going to blow up. Like, this is not a good design choice. This is just bad. So instead of something like that, you could choose some place like toward the bottom of your sculpture where when it's sitting on the table, you can't even see it. Or you could choose a place like under the beak where when you're kind of just hanging out, it's a little bit harder to see. It's a little camouflaged, but the air can still escape and it won't blow up. Any questions on subtraction? Okay. The last one we're going to talk about is called coil. If you're feeling tired, we're getting really close to done. So this actually is going pretty fast. Take a deep breath if you're struggling. Would I have to wedge this?
Yes.
I would have to wedge this. I'm not going to save some time. A coil is basically just a rope of clay. So you start out and you start to roll your clay into a coil that's approximately the thickness of your thumb, just like everything else. Coils work super well for details. So let's say you're making a shoe. You can roll coils for the shoelaces. Or let's say you're making a ballerina. You can make coils for her legs and her arms. Coils also work to build an actual object, to build the structure of an object. If you don't want to use slabs, or if you don't want to just sculpt it out of a block of clay and then hollow it out, this is an option that you may like. Rolling coils is harder than it looks. It looks a little bit easier than it is. When I roll coils, I generally push as I'm rolling forward and then just lightly roll it back. Because your goal is to make a coil that's consistent and kind of round, that isn't like super lumpy or one piece is like super skinny and one is really thick. So this is going to be my coil. It's about the thickness of my thumb. It could be a little thinner, but this should be just fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stack this coil kind of up on itself like this. Like a coil. And I'm going to use this to build a structure. So I could make as many of these as I want. Notice my clay is cracking. It's a little bit dry at this point because I've been working with it. If your clay starts to do that, just press it back together, spritz it with a little bit of water, and keep going. Now, as I stack this up, for the most part, this coil texture might not serve you unless you're making like a snake or a poop emoji or something that would use that texture. If I were to leave this exactly like this, what would I have to do to make it stay together? I would have to slip and score each of these pieces together if I wanted to leave the coil texture. But I don't. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my thumb, or a spoon, works really well, and I'm gonna blend these coils together. Now when I blend these together, this is technically called fusing or welding, right? Because you're turning one or multiple things into one thing. Since I'm fusing these together, I don't have to slip and score them, because I'm fusing them like completely together, both on the outside and on the inside. If you choose to do this, you can build a structure. Let's say you're building like a tree trunk or something like that, or a tree branch, or a pop can or something. This is already hollow. You can build it as tall as you want, and you don't have to scoop anything out. Like using coils gives you the option to just smooth it and be done. Okay, so this is building with coils. Any questions on coils? As you're building with your clay, this isn't on the worksheet, this is just, I know there's a little bit left, but as you're building with your clay is going to get more dry as you build with it. So by the end of the hour, you'll probably notice that your clay has some cracks in it, it's a little more crumbly than it was when you started. So when we store our clay, we're gonna make sure we wrap it in wet paper towels, so that way the next day when we come back, our clay is back to being a little bit more moisturized, easier to work with, and not crumbled. Okay? As you're working with your clay, I need you to do the best you can to problem solve how to build what you want to build out of this brick of clay. It takes pretty much the entire point out of it if I tell you exactly what to do, because you are creative enough to come up with your ideas to turn this into whatever sculpture you chose to create. Now, this last part of the worksheet. At the end of the hour, when we clean up, this is how you're going to store your clay. You know the answer that if your clay is too thick, it will explode. Let's say that this is my beautiful sculpture, right? I did a really good job. This is my very nice looking sculpture. But I also have a lot of extra clay, right? This stuff is stuff I have to use eventually, so I can't just throw it in the garbage. Don't do that. You have to put all of your extra clay together. It's part of your responsibility until the last day. Any projects that you've started on your sculpture, those are going to go on this clay board as well. And everything's going to get stored on this clay board. If your clay board doesn't have plastic on it, let me know, because we have to wrap it in plastic so the board doesn't get moldy. What you're going to do is you're going to take some paper towels and you're going to put some water on those paper towels. Not so much that it's dripping everywhere, but enough that the paper towels are actually damp. And you're going to drape those paper towels over top of your clay. Now, I wouldn't really need to do this one because this is mostly constructed. I don't have to do too much to it. And it should stay okay because this wet paper towel's in the bag. But anything extra you have to wrap with paper towels. If your clay's kind of dry, add more. Like add 3 layers of wet paper towels. Because if you do not do this, you're going to show up tomorrow, your clay's going to be super crumbly, and it's going to suck to work with it. It's going to be super annoying. So this is how you're going to keep yourself sane for the next week or so. There are white paper bags in this bottom cupboard. I'll get a roll up on the table. You're basically just going to take a white paper bag, put your entire board in the paper bag. Plastic bag. No, that's not paper. They're white plastic bags. You're going to put your whole project in the white plastic bag. You are going to write or tape your name on it, because all of these look the same at first. Can you look over where I'm pointing? Behind Dawson, not at Dawson. He's pretty tall, but. That brown shelf, the empty one that's kind of by the magazine shelf, that's where we're going to try to store most of our projects. Now, there will probably be like 7 of you that aren't going to be able to fit your projects there. If you're one of the people that doesn't find a place there, you're going to store yours on this shelf or on the floor underneath this table. This last question is one that you have to answer on your own. I do have just a couple more things before you move on. That was a long time.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, before you start working, the rest of the hour will be yours. We will clean up at approximately 1:30. When you're ready. This is how you'll know you're ready. Yesterday, you started a planning page. You must finish that before you grab your clay. Today, you started a worksheet. You must finish this before you grab your clay. I'm going to let you decide when you're ready. And as soon as you feel like you're ready, I'll leave you on there. I know it's a long time, but this directly impacts you. When you decide you're ready, when your worksheets are done, when they're on the cart, turned in, ready to go, there will be slabs of clay sitting at this table for you. You'll simply grab a slab of clay, you'll grab a clay board, and you'll take it to your spot. Clay tools and slip are going to be located on this table. I only have 2 wedging tables in this room. It gets a little chaotic, but try to wedge on the wedging tables so you don't have to do as much cleaning at your spot. Technically, you can wedge on these, but it just sticks a lot worse. I might see if I can steal a wedging table from Carlson's room for the hour and just kind of put it right here. But if this table gets a little bit crowded, make room for your neighbors, do the best you can, and when you're done wedging about 10 to 15 times, go back to your spot and start filling. Any questions? Okay.